Well, we're out here today in a huge stand of northern wild rice, which is this grass that you see leaning over the canoe and extending on behind me. And some of you that have followed my work know that wild rice is a really big part of our diet. In fact, it forms the lion's share of our calories through the year. We really feel very fortunate to be able to harvest a wild grain from the waters here in Maine. We're in the Kennebec River drainage. Now, the Great Lakes region is really well known for wild rice. In fact, many people purchase wild rice from that region and from California where it's paddy grown. But here, wild rice has also grown for many, many years, even back into prehistory. And we suspect this because the Kennebec Indians, who unfortunately are no longer found in these waters, had a word for it as well. Whereas in the Great Lakes region, Manomin is one of the names applied to wild rice here. It's Malamin. So again, we're out today to be harvesting wild rice, and we're going to give you a few clips of what it is we experience while we're out here on the waters harvesting this wild grain. Well, before I launch into footage of my partner and I gathering wild rice from the waters of Maine, I'd like to take just a moment to talk about grains in general. Now, grains are a class of foods that have received a lot of bad media lately, and many people are aware of this media and have instituted restrictions in their diet trying to cut out grains. Now, the issue here is that this message, which is largely a message that has come from the paleo diet community, is a message that I would argue is highly oversimplified. The message to avoid all grain is essentially attributing the ill effects of some grains to all grains. And like many other types of foods, grains are not created equally. And many of the gastrointestinal and autoimmune and inflammatory issues that people are dealing with due to modern bread wheat are not things that they would experience on other species of grain, such as northern wild rice and annual wild rice. These are species that are native here to North America that have been eaten by the indigenous for many, many generations, and we are fortunate here in Maine to have learned those techniques so that we can draw this wild food into our diet and essentially increase the diversity of foods that we experience. An important message that I think it would be beneficial for people to hear is that some of the reasons that we hear to avoid the consumption of grain are actually true of other foods that we are not told to avoid. For example, the presence of lectins, phytic acid, and tannins, which are allergens and anti-nutrients, are actually true of tree nuts as well. In fact, tree nuts have higher levels of anti-nutrients in some cases than any grain that I've ever seen reports of. And yet, tree nuts are considered to be an acceptable and appropriate food of the paleo diet, whereas grains are to be removed. Now, I want to make clear I'm not trying to speak poorly of the paleo diet because I think it has a lot of very sound principles, and it is certainly a massive step forward from the standard American diet. And let's face it, many people have experienced a real reclamation of their health by following this diet. What I'm trying to promote is the acceptance of a greater diversity of foods, an understanding that there are wild and organically raised heirloom grains that can be part of healthy, diverse diets. In fact, we know this from real-world observations of people who consumed certain grains combined with certain other kinds of foods and experienced health and vitality that most Americans will never even get to witness. Now, anyone who has seen some of my pictures have seen a pair of sticks, which are rice knockers, and this is the tool that we use to dislodge these ripe grains into the canoe. But of course, when we do this, we actually spread half of them anyways much further beyond the canoe, so we do our part in actually dispersing this. But what we do with the particular technique that we were taught, or part of our heritage, is called whip knocking. And there are multiple techniques, but this is the one that we use most of the time. With whip knocking, the outside arm reaches out and gathers up the grain, leaning it over canoe, and the inside arm kind of lightly swipes over the tops where all of the ripe grains are positioned to whip them and dislodge them into the canoe. And we alternate back and forth as we're pulling in this fashion. And you develop this wonderful rhythm as we go along. So that's the technique that we use to actually put the grains in the canoe. Now here is the wild rice that we have knocked into the canoe using that pair of rice knockers that you see there. And I wish I could show you the life that is teeming in this grain. There are a variety of arthropods that we inadvertently knock into the canoe, and these include rice spiders, rice hoppers, rice worms, and lots of ladybird beetles. In fact, my partner has even knocked a green frog into the canoe once. Our path through the rice. We, as people who are trying to be neo-aboriginals, we leave our tracks here and become part of the ecology, like the wild animals that live here. A small harvest today, just a few hours work, but still yielding enough food to feed someone for several months. So when we harvest rice, we've found through calculating that we get about 45% of the green or the live weight in finished processed rice. So if we were to get about 100 pounds one day, we would end up with about 45 pounds of finished wild rice. A lot less by volume, but this is how we cart it out of here in grain sacks. So here's the wild rice drying, and we lay it out in the sun. It takes about 3 days this time of year. And the drying, of course, makes it so that it's shelf stable, so that we don't have to worry about it mildewing or rotting. Now, unfortunately, we're about to get a rainstorm, and you can see the cloud cover here. So we'll be closing this up, folding the tarp over all of the rice, as we do at night to prevent the dew from soaking it. And it will weather like this for a couple of days, if needed, without any fear of it rotting. Until the sun comes back out, so we can finish drying this rice, where we bag it up and keep it until it's processed.